Hello, welcome to Restart Michigan webinar, Going the Distance, Mapping Your Next Steps for Long-Term Success. I'm Lori Ostro, I'm Senior Director of Engagement with the Detroit Regional Chamber, and we want to thank you for joining our session today. The Chamber launched this series of webinars to help businesses across the state prepare to restart operations and return to work. I would like to thank our guest speakers from Rehmann for volunteering their time to share their expertise. Before we get started, I wanted to make you aware that all participants are on mute, but you do have the option to submit a question directly to the speakers through the GoToWebinar control panel. I will now turn the webinar over to Chip from Rehmann. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks, Lori, and thank you to the Detroit Chamber for hosting us today and to all the participants for joining in. It's commonly been said that the pace of change has been accelerating for as long as we can remember. We're finding 2020, though, is going to be recognized as a year when the pace of change is no longer measured in terms of doubling or tripling. Instead, we see that pace of change increasing exponentially. As an integrated financial services and advisory firm serving clients across the United States and abroad, Rehmann's been working hard to help our clients keep up with what's become an ever-changing new normal, new each day it seems. Our main goal in this season has been helping individuals and organizations navigate through the uncertainty and complexity of this pandemic and other disturbances that we keep seeing, whether they be social or political. The forces that impact the change, be they regulatory, environmental, social, or political, continue now and are expected to continue to create disruption for the foreseeable future. Leaders who fail to adapt will risk at best being out of touch, and at worst, making a misstep that cripples or impacts the viability of the organization. I'm Chip Hoebeke. I'm the Director of Rehmann's Consulting Division, and I'm pleased today to present three of Rehmann's leaders who each bring a unique experience in their roles as advisors to executives in a variety of Southeast Michigan businesses and organizations. Bryan Kearis has worked in public accounting for more than 20 years with strong background in tax assurance and closely held business consulting. He works as a consultant in unique matters ranging from refinancing, lease renewal, cash flow projections, just to name a few. Ryan Krause is our Southeast Michigan office managing partner, housed out of our Detroit office located in Capitol Park's Farwell building. Bryan works with a broad range of clients and projects ranging from tax assurance, our SEC clients, transactional services committee, and quite a bit more. Sandy Shecter is a principal also in our Detroit office, and she is the director of our Rehmann Solutions division. Sandy leads the firm's solutions for clients in the accounting and business, human resource, and technology areas. Her teams work to provide business owners with a comprehensive approach to managing their businesses. Today, we're going to focus on three areas of opportunity to help business leaders protect their businesses and stay relevant in these rapidly evolving times: embracing digital transformation, developing an innovative learning culture, and planning for the unexpected. As we think about digital transformation, we've all witnessed firsthand the forced transition from the standard work routine that we've had in offices and out and about to a home-based work atmosphere. In many of our cases, it took place literally overnight. As a result, we've seen the workday and work week expand. We've seen professional dress codes called into question and important meetings being conducted with children or pets in the background. We'll hop into our first area now and talk about a couple of questions involving digital transformation. As we see states and counties slowly begin to open up travel, allow for in-person business operations, we'll start with Bryan Kearis. Let's talk about what you think the new normal is going to be in both the short and long term. What have we learned through this about our ability to conduct business by way of technology? What are you hearing from your executives and from your client base?
Good morning. Thank you, Chip. Yeah, this was been quite a 4 months for everybody, and especially businesses and trying to deal with the new normal or the abnormal from what we've been accustomed to dealing with. And those businesses that have really embraced technology and IT have been able to quickly pivot and transition their business to a digital platform. You think about it, you think about all of the work from home requirements that you need to be able to be successful, and the fact that you've had on-site meetings, you know, were your typical meetings, and now you have to do things on Zoom calls and those types of things. The companies that have really been successful had already been doing many of those things. So what we found is that they're able to work and be flexible with schedules, working at night, working early in the morning. I mean, you think about all of the families that have young children that need to homeschool their children and need to take care of their children where, you know, they had been in school or they had been at daycare, and now they had to transition quickly, and those are critical associates to the success of every business. So those clients have been able to make that transition and really leverage the technology in doing so.
Thanks, Bryan. Ryan Krause, we'll hop over to you next. Talk about relationships in this new now of digital transformation.
Well, it's definitely been an adjustment, Chip. I mean, I think, you know, for those clients that we have that have international operations, they've made adjustments to utilize technology, whether it's Zoom, you know, GoToWebinar, what have you, or GoTo meetings. I think what they've found is that in this new normal, being much more proactive with their international operations has helped. And, you know, from a relationship perspective, you know, the key is to be intentional, because it's one of those things where even for us with our client base, when we were able to go out and see them on a more frequent basis, we all know there's valuable discussion that comes from that. And with this new environment, it's being intentional, making the phone call or setting up the meeting, and almost creating a routine around it, because without the routine, again, when you're not running into people, it's different. But I think the biggest thing from a long-term perspective is making sure that there is a focus on relationships and not over-relying on technology to replace that, finding new ways to do it.
Thanks, Ryan. Sandy, talk about the work from home. Is it here to stay? You've got a good client experience I'd like you to share with the group.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's here to stay, maybe not quite where it's at right now, but I do think we'll see people working differently as we've shifted. So yeah, one of my clients, Brogan, is a full service marketing and advertising firm, and she really prided herself on bringing the teams together and collaborating and having that in-person connection with her staff, and was a little concerned when they shifted over, overnight they shifted to virtual, and really has been able to embrace it, and her staff have enjoyed that flexibility. She has trust in her staff. She has a morning huddle, sends them out on their way and says, you know what, go outside, get some fresh air. You don't have your morning commute, kind of giving them that flexibility. And when you trust your staff like that, you're going to see better results, because they can get that done. As Bryan mentioned, you've got to get some work done in the night because you might be homeschooling kids, you might be doing something different. So, she's done a great job at that, and now has looked at her office space and said, I might not need the same space. I might look at buying a building instead of having my lease, and using the building in a different manner, using it for client facing, not necessarily for the collaboration piece that she's been able to get from her staff, that they live an hour away. They don't have to drive in every day and have that commute.
Thanks, Sandy. We're going to stick with you a second. I want you to chat from the Rehmann Technology Solutions perspective, but we've been talking a bit about the relationships with in the company, with associates, with customers. Let's talk a bit now about cash and closings and things like this. We now, in many cases, no longer require in-person notaries. We're seeing different types of electronic commerce. Talk for a second about the digital transformation of how actual transactions and transfers of cash have been going on. What's happening in terms of risk? What's happening in terms of where you see this going, and are we ever going to go back?
Well, I think we're going to have some changes and probably end up somewhere in the middle at some point. But yeah, I mean, we used to use the term cash is king, and everything, that was always the best, form of whether it be a check or cash. And I think we're going to see that with contactless payment, and really the way bills are produced and paid, everything will be as virtual as can be. But that being said, you know, we've got to make sure the cyber side is taken care of. So, you know, no business is too small to be hacked. We have to really make sure we're protecting that piece, because as you go to contactless payment, as you go to, you know, both receiving and paying bills and doing, you know, your virtual, your back office, your accounting can truly be digital. And so you have to just now make sure, how are you looking at it from the cybersecurity side? And as I said, no business is too small to have that to be hacked. So you really have to protect that side. You have to really take those precautions and look at your cybersecurity.
Ryan, with your international clients, some of your larger publicly traded clients, what are you seeing? Obviously, they can't fly right now to go negotiate new contracts. You can't look people in the whites of the eyes and read the body language. What do you see happening with some of the larger organizations and the way that they've had to do it? I suppose, you know, in the automotive world, we've already had a lot of move towards online purchase orders and different kinds of management, you know, through procurement and things like that. Has this pandemic forced a faster change and embrace worldwide?
I mean, I think it partly depends on the country, right? As some of the divisions that they have in different countries are more advanced in that regard, but I think they all recognize that for those countries that are a little further behind, they need to make a push. Even simple things like monthly reporting, they're getting, you know, for instance, a client that I have that's got a large operation in China. I mean, they've gone to weekly now. He's also installed cameras in all his plants so he can see what's going on, because I think there was a comfort level that we all had, whether it's international or domestic, with, you know, visiting the operations and seeing what's going on, and that's, you know, going to be taken away for the foreseeable future. And by using technology, whether it be cameras or you know, many of them are doing more frequent meetings now to kind of get an update on where things are at operationally. And I think for many of them that I talk to, they feel much more comfortable about where things are at, especially internationally, because before it might have been a monthly trip, and now it's a, you know, it's a weekly meeting and more frequent reporting. So you know, I think we'll talk throughout that there's some silver linings that have come out of this whole this pandemic, and I think one of them is improved communication and more timely communication.
Thanks, Bryan. Bryan, let's have you talk a little bit about actual closings, about conducting buys and sells of businesses. I know it's an area that you work on, both in the real estate and just in general. What are you seeing as far as this inability to get together in person slowed anything down, or have we figured out ways to overcome, and what do you see as far as going ahead?
Yeah, I think in terms of M&A activity, you know, frankly, we have a couple of deals that are ongoing, and the way that those have been ongoing, the two deals that we're working on right now are in the e-commerce world, that they serve that industry. So there are opportunities, and the way that we're transacting business is leveraging the technology, using the Zoom calls, meeting with people, going through strategy, sharing documents, and if we found it to be actually quite efficient. Before, people would travel, get together, you'd have overnight stay. So some of the benefits, as Ryan and Sandy touched on, is that there's some cost savings related to embracing the technology and working through that technology. You may have somebody call in from California. You have a couple people in from Michigan and New York, where before there'd be probably a get together and travel that would take up a couple of days of time and cost to do that. Well, now you have a 2-hour meeting that you're conducting, and it's quite efficient. And I would also like to add, just on some barriers, Chip, that I see in the closely held business world as it relates to embracing this. The technology has been around for some time. Some have been slow to adapt to that technology, and they found themselves, okay, now we need to turn the faucet on and really embrace the technology. And what they find in that world, where they're maybe too small to be big, too big to be small kind of world, is they don't have a full IT staff on hand. So they look outside their organization to say, We need help from professional help that can help us make sure that we have addressed cybersecurity, that we are as efficient as we possibly can be, that we have evaluated the softwares that make sense for our business. So we're seeing a lot of those types of meetings that are very beneficial, and you can outsource that at a pretty reasonable cost versus trying to hire and maintain a staff full time. So there's a couple of things that we're seeing.
Thanks, Brian. We're going to swing over to Sandy now and continue on this technology theme. Perhaps not a silver lining that Ryan was going to talk about is what the risks are involving social media. You talk a little bit about what our technology solutions folks are seeing and what you're seeing, Sandy, as far as risks that have to be managed in this new now, maybe newer now than normal.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we talked about, you know, I made a comment that, you know, no business is too small to really be affected by this. So, you know, social media is an awesome platform, and we're using it for so many things. We're using it for advertising, to get our businesses out there, to keep our pulse on what's going on. So I have a client, you know, medical practice that an ex-employee, a terminated employee, hacked into their social media account and posted things that were completely inappropriate, you know, inappropriate at any time. But right now we have a hypersensitive time period in our society, and this client was hacked, and it affected their business. Their employees and the owners of the business were personally threatened. The FBI was called in. I mean, it was all over the news, but you know, it's really very concerning. And this is again where you've got to use, you've got to work on your cybersecurity. You've got to think through the onboarding and offboarding process from a digital side, and what does that look like? Because it looks different, and things that you might not have thought of before, you have to step back and think of differently. So social media is one of those things that probably you didn't really think about, and now you've got to really, you know, kind of step back and say, where does that relate to my IT side? How am I protected?
Great, Sandy. While you're on a roll, I wonder if you can just talk a little bit, wrapping us up around what we're seeing in terms of remote workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, Bryan kind of teed it up when he talked about all the great things that you can, that look differently now and can help save you money. You know, there's so many areas that you need help and you need it quicker. And for you to hire someone and onboard them and get them to know your culture of your company takes a long time. So if you look at your, you know, your advisors and who can help you, whether it's outsourcing HR, there's so many things that we have to be on top of, or outsourcing your accounting department or your IT, where, you know, you can scale it up or scale it back as you're trying to control costs. I think that's what's key. You know, when I'm looking at the screen to see, making sure that I've covered everything that you've talked about, but I think one of the areas that's opened up, and I think, you know, Ryan talked about it and Bryan talked about it too, is talent management. And now you've got the capability to hire, you don't have to just look in your 25 or 50 mile radius. Now you can think outside the box, and is there talent across the country that you used to not tap into, and now you can tap into that talent and look at it little differently. You know, when you're having a meeting, you know, we're doing this via Zoom. If this was live, we would have all traveled. We would have had travel time to Detroit to get prepped for the presentation, and we're doing this via Zoom. So we've saved time just here, not Zoom, a different technology platform. But I think that's yeah, that's one of the things that we have to look at. You know, on the screen we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about multi-factor authentication. All those things are going to be part of just our normal process as we move to remote workforces.
Thanks, Sandy. All right, we are going to switch over now from digital transformation to talk about an innovative learning culture. Here in Michigan, over the last few months, we've seen over 100 executive orders. Federal government has issued several major stimulus packages. Local governments, local organizations, they've had ordinances, grant opportunities, huge amounts of information and change around safety and finding money and reporting and all these sorts of things. Developing a culture within an organization that's constantly evolving and can adapt to these changes is now more critical than ever. Ryan, Krause, we're going to start with you. I'd like to know, for your clients that have been successful in keeping pace with the important regulatory and legal changes. How have they done it? How have they gone about disseminating information throughout their organization and ensuring compliance and not running afoul of any number of possible moving targets that they have to comply with?
Yeah, thanks, Chip. I think with the dissemination aspect of it, communication more frequently has been important. So I think we're communicating not only internally, but our clients are as well, much more frequently with their staff to let them know what's going on. And we've obviously all made adjustments to the way we work and the things we do on a daily basis. So ensuring that they know and there's clear lines of communication is very important. But I think the one thing I'll focus on the slide we have is the credible information. And you know, Sandy talked about social media, and there's a lot out there. And I think what we found is that the most important thing for our clients and businesses in general is to find those trusted advisors and lean on them, which they would do normally in difficult times. But I think it's even more important right now because there's so much changing so quickly, and there's so many different interpretations in some cases of what something means. And there's legal risks, there's financial risks, there's a lot of risk involved to making the wrong decision. So I found that our clients are, you know, obviously from the accounting perspective or financial perspective, looking to us, their attorneys, et cetera. But there's been a lot of collaborative meetings to discuss, hey, what's the right approach to this? If there's any, you know, any room for maybe uncertainty in what's really being contemplated.
Thanks, Ryan. Bryan, how about you? What have you seen that's impressed you from your clients?
Yeah, I'll just piggyback a little bit what Ryan said. You know, when you think about all of the noise that we're inundated with on a daily basis, you know, as Ryan said, social media, you know, the traditional network media, what to believe, what not to believe, putting those teams together is critical. And then the cadence of how often you meet is very critical too, because it's the rapid change of information. I mean, just think of the PPP loans that many businesses were eligible for and how that changed day to day. The rules changed, the calculation changed, the banks weren't sure how to handle it initially. So all of those things, having a team that's in touch on a daily basis, minimally on a weekly basis to continue to update. And as we've all discovered, I think at the beginning of this pandemic, we kind of thought, well, this might be a month, maybe 6 weeks. Well, now we realize that this is something that we're going to be dealing with for the near term, you know, for some time, that we basically have to work in this environment. So it's not going to be going back to how we did things. So I think that's the key for companies that are successfully navigating this difficult time, is really putting together a strong team. And I think Sandy mentioned it about talent management. And the talent is rising to the top in organizations. Those that are able to adapt, to be innovative, to have vision, to think clearly in a chaotic period of time. Those associates, you know, are going to garner a premium at every organization, no matter what you do. So it's important to take care of those people. It's important to identify them and make sure that they know they're a big part of the solution and the future.
Thanks, Bryan. Sandy, let's switch over to you for a second. I know the HR Solutions group you manage has been rocking and rolling nonstop, trying to keep up with all the things in Michigan and abroad, with all the different states and counties and whatnot. Talk a little bit about perhaps how clients have needed help. You know, how an organization with 1 or 2 HR people is able to possibly keep up with specifically the human resource side of things.
Yeah, thank you, Chip. There has been a significant, you think a lot of change every day on orders. I mean, I just heard gyms opened in Florida one day and the next day they were closed, and then I think they're reshifting and now going to open again. So that's the constant change, and that has an HR impact for those companies as they're trying to navigate what they need to do. Yeah, our HR team put together, I think we have over 45 PDF documents that are constantly changing, and we're updating constantly. And the nice part about that is they can be laser focused on what you need, because it's a lot to shift through all that information. So I think the key is having, you know, if you've got an HR team, if you've got one HR person, if you've got someone that works, you know, part-time or full-time in HR, that you have someone that you can reach out to and say, hey, I have a question, because it's really the onslaught of information is overwhelming. And I think that's what's key, is if you have someone you can reach out to, a business advisor, an HR person, an attorney, part of your bench that you can say, I need help with this. I need to be able to pinpoint how it affects my business and my industry. The medical business is going to have different things than the gym owner has, or the restaurant owner has, you know, or the real estate company. So you really have to be able to weed through all that in a quick fashion. I found my clients need to be nimble and quick to be able to shift their focus on all the ever coming changes at them.
All right, Sandy, let's stick with you for a second while we talk about nimble and quick. What are some of the forward thinking strategies that you're seeing businesses either already taking advantage of, or things they need to as they mitigate risk? I think about risks, you know, even just our workplace safety and compliance, but also operating in a socially responsible manner. Talk about some of the things that that your clients are thinking about or already doing, if possible.
Yep. So I think, you know, the biggest, well, there's so much I could talk about. So I'm going to start with kind of, in my mind, the basics. And I think Bryan alluded to it at one point is, you know, we often hear the term data analytics, and some people would say, I don't even know what that means. The days of the financial statement that was historical, the days of the financial statement that compared, you know, 3 months later or 2 months later, you got a financial statement. It just isn't relevant anymore. We're in real time. And I think my clients that they're focused on, where am I at today? What are my receivables at? What's my cash flow today, next week, and a month from now? Yes, we've got to be thinking 6 months out and a year out, you know, still managing your business, but you can't look at the historical piece. You've got to really be working in the moment. And I think that's what's key. So, you know, I would suggest people are flexible, they're open-minded. You know, we're going to talk at some point, I think, about businesses that have thought outside the box. I'm going to tell you to also focus in the box. You've built this widget, you've been doing this, you know what you're doing. Focus on that and rely on your teams to help you with the other parts, whether it's the accounting, the technology, all the other pieces. I think I covered what you asked.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Bryan. Switch over to you and talk about the importance of external consultants, especially with these nonstop changes. And the easy example is trying to keep up with tax laws and tax changes. You know, most folks use an external tax accountant or a tax attorney to help with these sorts of things. But what else are you seeing your clients lean on consultants in regards to help make sure that their business, their operation knows what it needs to know, but sorts through all the chaff that they don't need to know about?
I think you called on me, Chip, Bryan.
Yes, Bryan. Yep.
Okay. Just making sure. Yeah, I think one of the other areas, you know, Sandy already touched on IT and HR outsourcing, but the other one is CFO. You see a lot of clients that have, you know, may have an internal accountant that is very busy with the day-to-day operation, and they don't have the time to kind of take that step back and strategically look at, you know, long-term planning. So what we've helped our clients with is really, from a financial standpoint, come in, take a look at their financial situation. And the first thing we did is said, look, we're in this, you know, unpredictable situation. And in order to get through to the other side, we're going to need as much working capital as we can possibly raise. So we would go in, we've gone in with our clients, we've brought the banks in proactively, met with the bankers, looking at opportunities within their current financial structure to raise capital. So that may mean, hey, let's convert some fixed costs to, you know, monthly costs, whether it's going from, you know, taking refinancing some equipment and refinancing it as a lease, and you take the equity out and put it in your bank so you can use it for future needs. Looking at real estate, refinancing, the interest rates are so low right now that it's advantageous to refinance. The banks have been on board with this because they obviously are in it with the customer. They want their customer to be successful. They see that it makes financial sense. So those are just a couple of things we're doing, Chip, and really from a CFO perspective, bringing in some of those tools, looking at 13-week cash flow, where you're really diving into that perspective, approach to business, as Sandy said, versus looking backwards in the rearview mirror, but looking forward and focusing on, some of those key areas. So those are some of the things that we're doing with our clients.
Great. Ryan Krause, we'll switch from Bryan to Ryan. Want to talk a bit about some innovative opportunities that our clients are taking advantage of, and maybe I want to have you chat a little bit about the Firebolt Group. It's a Wixom-based manufacturer right in the southeast neck of the woods.
Yeah, so Firebolt's one of a number of examples I'm aware of where we had clients that shifted pretty quickly, and not only from a workforce perspective, but looking at opportunities that would be present as a result of the pandemic. And whether it's the Firebolt example or another one, I think the thing that all of us can attest to, and working with clients for a long time, is that there are always opportunities that come out of situations like this for growth. I mean, you think about the downturn, 07, 08, the people that really took a step back and evaluated their products and their service offerings. If you do that in the right way collaboratively, you can really have a growth opportunity that comes out of change. And Sandy raised a good point too, as far as you can't take your eye off the ball as far as what you're good at, but evaluating alternatives and getting your team together and Firebolt's an example. And I have another client that literally got their key people together and said, what can our product be used for to help with this pandemic? And by making quick adjustments, they actually ramped up in a time when a lot of people were slowing down. So I think the key takeaway here is that we hear a lot of negatives when you hear what's out there from a media perspective. But doing this long enough to have seen there are a lot of different ways to make money, and there are a lot of opportunities that come out of change. And I really can't think of a time when we had more change. So look at change as an opportunity.
That's a great transition into, I suppose we have a little bit on tips for getting back to business, but our last topic is planning for the unexpected. The reality is we're not out of the woods yet. We know that whether we have resurgence of hot spots or new peaks, or the whole second wave of COVID that's coming, clearly the need for social change has been brought to the forefront, and we're seeing reactions and changes and needed things in that area. And the political climate continues to be full of so many unknowns. There's an election coming up in November, and I don't think anybody knows for sure what's going to happen, but there's going to be results and consequences one way or the other. So as we think about planning for the unexpected, I'm going to stick with Ryan for the moment and ask Ryan, what are some other of the most powerful and unexpected opportunities that have been created for your clients? We've talked about some product shifts, but what about rethinking the workforce, rethinking the workspace?
Yeah, I guess from a workforce perspective, and I think we saw this, I saw it a little bit in 01, 02, maybe 07, 08 for sure, but we're going to see it again, and it's that shift. I think especially when you look at what's going on in automotive, and with automotive, it takes a while to ramp back up again. It's not like flipping a switch. And I don't know if we've talked about fixed versus variable workforce, but I think we'll continue to see people shift more towards subcontract labor, engineering or contract services that are, where when they need it, it's there, and when they don't, they can turn it off. And I know one client in particular back in '08 went from 90% maybe fixed for their workforce to probably 75% variable. And when this thing hit, thankfully they had quite a bit of cash, but they also were able to really turn things quickly. So it's in some way, by using staffing agencies, et cetera, you can shift the risk a little bit. And we've seen many clients do that. I mean, from an environment perspective, it's hard to say. I mean, I've heard everything from, are we going to need commercial real estate again, to, well, if we have to socially distance, we might need more of it to have people come in the office. So I think that still remains to be seen, and I think there's a short-term and a long-term maybe view of that too. But the workforce part is key, and as Sandy mentioned, historical information is not going to help you with that. You got to get ahead of it and know what your projections look like, challenge the projections so that you know what type of workforce you're going to need when things, do open up.
Sandy, let's talk a little bit about being financially comfortable. Boy, is this a time for people to hunker down? Is this a time to be entrepreneurial and expand? What kind of financial resources or access to capital should you have? What are you advising your clients, and what are you hearing from them in this time?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about my clients. I'll probably defer to Bryan because he probably has a better view on terms of what clients are doing. My client base is predominantly in the medical and dental field, and they've had to really think outside the box in terms of using technology. So where I had clients that never touched, didn't do any telemedicine, were kind of resistant to it. There's compliance issues, HIPAA compliance. They've embraced it. I probably have 90% of my, medical practices have embraced telemedicine where they didn't do it before. The access to capital, again, I'm probably going to look at Bryan. I do have two clients that are looking at buying a building, and the banks have been very receptive. I think there's going to be a lot of incentives out there, especially, Chip, as you mentioned, that we're entering a election year. That we're in an election year, that things are still up in the air, but with the SBA and the banks, I think we're going to see a lot of opportunity for investments. But I'm gonna moderate here and bring it over to Bryan.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, I think just to add to that a little bit, what we are trying to do is, I think when we're looking at daily dashboards, right? So we've set up daily dashboards with KPIs, right? Key performance indicators that say, okay, where's our accounts receivable? What's our accounts payable? What's our expected cash inflow? These are real, practical things that we're putting in place. And before, you might do that once a quarter, kind of project, look at the prior quarter, and now you're doing that on a weekly basis. And you're trying to maintain, trying to predict what your working capital is going to be best you can. And you don't want to, be caught sleeping when you said, you should have known something a few weeks ago and you waited. So it's important just to stay on top of it. Some of the other things that we're doing, Ryan mentioned that we're seeing a huge shift from payroll being on your payroll to being outsourced, would be temp labor, where it's not your core business. So you're able to flex up and down as things go on. One of the panelists mentioned, one day you're open, the next day you're closed. I mean, that's the environment we're in. So to hire somebody long-term, or to have a lot of legacy costs that you need, you need consistent volume to cover those costs. We're not in that environment right now for the most part. So those are some of the practical things that we're dealing with. But I would add that it's very important to include your banker, look at all the programs that are available out there, whether it's the PPP or local grants, or just refinancing opportunities. There's plenty of opportunities to really leverage that and set yourself up to take advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves.
Thanks, Bryan. We're going to switch over now to Ryan Krause. I want you to talk, especially from a large client perspective, but in this environment, how do you even set goals? I mean, how do you set short-term 90-day goals? How do you look out 5 years? How do you know what your market's going to look like? How do you know what kind of talent you can get a hold of? Or how do you know what kind of talent you're going to lose as suddenly folks are able to poach you from a distance, because now it doesn't matter so much where somebody sits.
Yeah, well, I think it's it's difficult. As I heard Bryan talking, I mean, think about the number of companies that I've talked to that are basically trying to find as much excess liquidity as they can right now. And I think it's worth mentioning that, and I think Bryan and Sandy would agree, most of the companies that we're talking to are concerned about Q3 in particular. So, if you think about the past few months, from a cash flow perspective, January and February were pretty good for a lot of people. March started to slow down. April and May were in some cases non-existent. The PPP or government money, however you want to look at it, helped get people through that. But now all of a sudden they're going to start working off of cash flow from April and May, and things are going to get tight. So what I've seen from a forecasting perspective is, hate to say it, but multiple versions. So A plan, B plan, C plan, D plan, what have you. And maybe normally where you challenge a forecast monthly or quarterly or whatever, they're challenging them maybe not weekly, but every 2 weeks, just to kind of see. And we're even doing that as a firm to really keep an eye on things. So again, this real-time aspect of it, and for those companies that are still significantly delayed in getting financial results, it's not going to cut it going forward, especially when you have banks involved that are going to be looking for much more proactive information. And then I guess the last thing from a talent perspective, I think Bryan or Sandy alluded to this earlier. The key talent always rises to the top when things get chaotic, and we're going to continue to see that. And I think it's increasingly important that companies look at their key people and find creative ways to retain them. So cash flow may be going a different direction, but there are different ways creatively that you can retain your key people, whether it be options or different aspects of ownership, et cetera. ESOPs are becoming popular again. Who knows, but the competitive environment for talent is going to even increase more than it has in the past. I'm confident of that.
Thanks, Ryan. Bryan, I'm gonna head over to you, and I'm gonna stick with this topic of forecasting. Lots of companies, they have a hard time getting timely historical information. A great goal might be by the 10th day after month end to have some financials about last month end. Is that going to do it anymore? Is that going to be an indicator? If you can't get that far, how do you possibly do monthly projections? And if you can't get monthly projections at all, much less pretty accurate forecasts, how are you going to be able to plan for the unexpected? Is it just the lucky survive, or how is that going to work?
Yeah, I think it's imperative that the information is timely, and it may mean that if your closeout procedure to close out a prior period was a hard close where there was a lot of detail involved, or you're trying to get down to the penny, and so you held the month open for 10 or 15 days. Instead of doing that, do more of a soft close and say, okay, here's where we're at. We're close enough to make a decision of where we're headed. But again, it's still going to be more about the weekly meetings of looking forward on backlog, on work in process, communication with your vendors. That's critical. Reach out to your vendors and say, look, here's our situation. Be transparent, just like you would with your bank, and work through that to try to stretch some cash flow. On the flip side, accounts receivable. Make sure, don't sit there and just hope I'm going to get paid. Make sure you're proactively pursuing those accounts that are past due. You can work with your bank on borrowing base and those types of things to free up some cash flow. But again, the velocity of information must increase, and the way to do that is what the whole theme of this call today is about leveraging the technology, and outsourcing talent where you need it to fill those gaps where before it wasn't as important. You kind of knew where you were. You'd say, okay, here's my sales. I know what my margin typically is. I'm good. That's just not going to be the way of the near future anyway.
Thanks, Bryan. Sandy, let's finish off this topic and maybe talk about what you're seeing on the accounting solutions side as far as what clients are reaching out looking for help with in terms of trying to transition from historical to prospective?
Yeah, so I think the key has been technology and how do they leverage the technology. So, you know, if you can leverage technology and use it for your accounting department, you can have that information in real time. You can have, you know, be updated quicker. And I think that's what we're seeing from our client base is they want that dashboard. They want that quick look at where are they at today, and what is this going to look like in a month. I've had more clients than ever kind of talk to me about, let's project out 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, you know, not your, you know, used to be looking at, you know, historical and then maybe looking at what we could look at next year. But now they're really looking at it. Where is it at today, and what am I going to be looking at in a month? And that's the only way from the accounting side is you need to be hands-on. You need to be able to see it quicker. And so I think that's what we're seeing most is that people wanting that information faster, which means you have to be nimble. You have to be quicker in terms of looking at the information, getting it recorded. And the only way you can do that is through technology.
Thanks, Sandy. All right, we'll wrap up with a couple of key takeaways as we think about going the distance. How are we going to make sure you make it? Lean on resources. We've talked about all sorts of resources, working with your banks, your lawyers, your advisors, your CPA firms, insurance agents. The world's changing fast, and one of the ways to keep up is not trying to do it all yourself, but just making sure you're aligned with someone who can sort through the wheat and the chaff and just give you the good stuff. Secondly, boy, forward-looking forecasting is going to become the future. We're going to start, I think, seeing banks looking more at that than financials as we talk about it, lending decisions, as we talk about financing decisions, possibly even vendors starting to really look more critically at the ability of their customers to accurately forecast. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, communication. Keep learning, keep communicating. Our employees need it, our clients and customers need it, our communities need it. Continuing to drive momentum forward through innovation, through innovative thinking, through learning and communication. It just keeps on coming back to that. All the things we've talked about, nimbleness, agileness, being ready to using the word of 2020, pivot frequently, maybe getting ready to repivot with a new word, you know, as these changes keep on coming. You know, this is how we're going to go the distance. So we really appreciate everyone's time and attention today. We thank the Chamber for the opportunity, and we will give control back to the Chamber.
Hello, there it goes. There I am. Thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. Again, this is Lori from the Chamber. I want to thank Rehmann and everyone who participated today's call. You will receive an email from me with a link to today's presentation. And please do visit our website, detroitchamber.com, for more information on future webinars and teletown halls to help you get restarted through this process. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.